Freeman Hall, as you see in front of you, was to be renamed Mitchell Freeman Hall to, quote, honor the life and work of John Mitchell Jr., 1863 to 1929, a former enslaved person with a complex story who became the editor of the African-American newspaper, The Richmond Planet, and some of whose descendants are members of the University of Richmond community, end quote. Notwithstanding the language of inclusiveness and the deft balancing act evident in the president's letter, the seriousness of the backlash in the wake of this letter cannot be overstated. Inside Higher Ed ran an article on March 12th, 2021, that linked to the students' Protect Our Web statement, Protect Our Web. That term, a riff borrowed from the university's COVID-19 response. For those who don't know, our mascot is a spider, and we talk about the web. And this was a theme, Protect Our Web, that was used by the institution to ask students to wear masks, stay 6 feet apart, and so on. So the students now co-opt this phrase. And by March 4th, the Protect Our Web statement had been signed by over 90 Black students. And in fact, last check, over 900 faculty, staff, and students across, also alum across the institution, trans historically, really. So in this statement, in this Protect Our Web statement, the students make 3 demands of the university. The first directly pertaining to building names. And I'll put the 3 in front of you, but I'm only going to read the first because it's pertaining to what we're talking about today. We demand the names of Ryland Hall and Mitchell Freeman Hall be changed, specifically removing the names of Robert Ryland and Douglas Southall Freeman from these buildings. I will later return to the students' framing of their response in terms of demands rather than requests or even propositions, proposals. The language of demands forces an oppositional adversarial relationship between students and the university. And the students would certainly argue that it is others, it is the university that forced their hand. The president re-entered the dialectic on March 17th, redoubling the naming argument as being in keeping with our educational mission. The result, a heightening of tensions, the students now moving their deadline for the demands to be met from April 1 to March 25. The tete-a-tete, or at least its general contours, have been documented in 3 separate Inside Higher Education updates for anyone interested in seeing or in relating the specifics of my institution to your own. The students' demands at the University of Richmond are consistent with broader sets of moves harkening back at least a year, and certainly well before that, if we consider Roads Must Fall in South Africa. It feels like forever ago, but that was only in 2015. And now there's a play called The Fall that was written about Roads Must Fall. Of course, there's Calhoun College at Yale, the name of which the university changed in 2017, and countless other examples and actions taken since the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2012, whether directly or tangentially related to BLM. During the summer of 2020, night after night, demonstrators gathered at critical crossroads in Richmond, Virginia, where they confronted an old order at the feet of Confederate monuments. The monument to J.E.B. Stuart in Richmond, Virginia, gestures to that of Sir Uttram in Calcutta, India, from 1870. The monuments are, of course, classicizing. The British had built their empire on the model of Rome, and their imperial memorials celebrated the same masculine martial triumph. The Stuart statue was erected in 1907 during a period of nostalgia for the Old South in America, in the heart of a city that had been the capital of the Confederate States. And I want to recognize at my university the work of our very own Nicole Marantonio, author of the 2019 book, Confederate Exceptionalism, Civil War and Memory in the 21st Century. This book has been critical to my understanding of the continuing legacy of the Confederacy and the Old South in everyday life in Virginia today, and certainly across the country. In contrast to the imperial project of Confederacy, the graffiti at the base of the Stuart statue and that of others across Richmond proclaim that Black Lives Matter in solidarity with the demos, the people, to borrow a classical usage that Roderick A. Ferguson puts to good use in his 2015 book, We Demand, the University and Student Protests. By incorporating these statues, the state powers in Virginia had aligned with the Confederacy, its values and its message. Viewed as an arm of state violence, in opposition to the demos, police officers were certainly at the center of the crisis last summer. It was, of course, a police officer, Derek Chauvin, whose foot crushed George Floyd's neck on May 25th, 2020. The words police brutality, no cops, can be seen at the base of the statue, also in contrast to calls for love and peace, also inscribed, not only on this base, but across the city. If monuments, and I believe, by the way, that this one is from the Lee statue, the Robert E. Lee statue, this base. If monuments celebrate a particular civic order, then a gesture toward a new regime had already been made in Richmond on December 10, 2019, when the Museum of Fine Arts unveiled the 27-foot monument it had commissioned Kehinde Wiley to build. And here is Rumors of War. Wiley, widely known for his portrait of President Obama, titled his piece Rumors of War from Matthew 24, verse 6, quote, "Yet and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of war. See that ye not be troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." The biblical passage where Jesus signals toward a time when nation shall rise against nation was thought by some a disturbing reference upon which to draw. Wiley's writer, however, responds to an already disturbing social reality to which the writer would be immediately juxtaposed. Clearly of African descent, with locks pulled back and head turned in a gesture that echoes Stuart, and that statue on the left is from when the statue was in Times Square in New York City. Shout out to Chris Dorsey if he's there. We took this image when we were together in New York watching a play. But that statue was then moved to Richmond for its permanent home. But if you see on the right, the writer is writing toward a building that is actually the memorial to the Daughters of the Confederacy. And this picture on the right is, of course, Richmond, Virginia, in front of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Pristine on December 10, 2019, when I took this picture, by July 20, the Daughters of the Confederacy building that you see in front to the right of the statue was heavily graffitied, armed guards monitoring the premises daily. Ironically, Wiley's writer gestures in the opposite direction. His head is facing in the opposite direction, perhaps toward the army of protesters that he would bring soon, as symbolic armies gathered toward competing and irreconcilable goals, nation rising against nation. We will return to the student protests and the statues later, but these images, along with the protests, raise questions of heritage and belonging that are certainly the province of classical studies, but that have resonated even more profoundly this year, particularly in light of the provocations and counter-provocations about burning the field down.